Hi there and welcome to this week's episode on the guest list. I am your host, Steve Guest. I'd like to give a big warm welcome to all our listeners. A bit of background in terms of this podcast. So I set about on a mission to add as much value as possible to a growing network, and the guest list really was born out of that. And I put out some social media posts and said, who would you like to listen to? Who should I be talking to? Who do you feel within your network offers great value and would be of interest to you, our listeners? And this guest has been nominated a number of times, and I'm genuinely excited to speak to them over the course of today's podcast. I'm going to run through a quick bio before we get started. So today's guest is the director of the Lazarus Consultancy Limited. To run through credentials and experience, former management consultant at Ernst & Young, originally trained and qualified as an accountant, FCCA and corporate treasurer, FCT, author of 4 best business books, Ahead of the Game, How to Use Your Mind to Win in Sport, Successful NLP for the Results You Want, The Little NLP Workbook, and NLP for Business Success. Former financial director of the Sushi brand, who I'm sure many of you will have heard of. Executive and sports performance coach, certified master trainer of NLP, accredited master executive coach, amongst a number of other approved accreditations. Specialities in sports performance coaching, business executive coaching, business orientated certified NLP training, leadership assessment and development. My word, what an extensive bio. I am extremely excited to have today's guest on, so much so I've actually booked this person in for 2 podcasts. Today, I suppose you can class as part 1. So a huge warm welcome to Jeremy Lazarus.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be here.
It's fantastic.
Really
I am really excited for today's talk, and I know our conversations off air, you're as passionate about today's subject as I am.
Absolutely.
So today's subject is all about money. It's something that we all have. Some have more than others. Some know how it all works and how it fits together. And that's really going to be the topic of today. So why, in your own words, Jeremy, do you think money is such a hot topic?
I think, so I'm really interested in people. I'm interested in people being fulfilled, happy and successful. And I think there are certain key factors in life that help people to be successful. Having a great career, having good health, having great relationships, having sufficient amount of money, plus other factors. So I think money is one of the core components of having a fulfilled and successful life. Certainly in the, inverted commas, the Western world. I'm sure that other sort of societies in the world where money is not important. In the UK and certainly Western Europe and the Western world, I think money it's really important for people to have sufficient amount that it fulfills their needs and wants.
Mm-hmm. It's a strange old thing, isn't it, with money, because it's quite often regarded as the root of all evil. People look at money as quite often a bad thing, and I think that's definitely a misquoted line as well. Where do you think that comes from? Why do people associate money as being bad?
I mean, I think, as I understand it, the quote in the Bible is the love of money is the root of all evil.
Correct. Yeah.
So there could be some of that. There could be, if I was going to be cynical, I could say that certain powers that be don't want the masses to be successful and wealthy or educated, because we may challenge some of the things that they say and do. For many, many years, society, certainly again in the Western world, are very structured. And I think part of the what makes these years such an interesting time is that people are beginning to challenge the status quo and asking questions like, why should we believe people who are in power? Why should we trust them? So I think it can be messages that are passed down through generation, family to family. And I think, I think there are some people in power who don't want us to know about money, quite frankly. So part of my one of the reasons why I'm very passionate about this and passionate about education generally is because I think it's important that we all know about money, how it works, how to make the most of it, so that it, if you like, empowers us and we can empower our children and the next generation.
It's so true. And I think if you think back to my education at school, they don't teach you about money. They don't give you financial literacy.
Yeah.
They teach you what has always been taught in schools, and it's very archaic, very traditional. And I might upset a few people with that statement, but I only really started learning about money probably over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people learn about it in the inverted commas, the University of Life.
Yeah.
I had a fairly traditional education, and I did O-level and A-level economics. I'm showing my age by saying O-levels rather than GCSEs. So we learned to some extent about what money was, and I'm good with numbers, and I went into accountancy in the world of finance. So I guess you learn that way, but most people don't know. And I think there's a lot of mystique and mystery around money. And I think the financial services industry generally wants to keep an element of mystique so that the experts, in inverted commas, retain their status.
It's so true as well. I've had conversations with experienced financial people. I used to recruit for finance people in the very early days.
Yeah.
And whilst they might be very good at their day job and understand how to balance the books and make sure everything fits, but actually manning their own cash is a different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
And it's almost a subject removed from something that they should or are qualified in. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things I want to cover today is why is it that some people can earn a lot of money, so the earnings can be high, but actually their wealth or their level of the investments or the amount of money they have can be very low. In some cases, negligible. So you'll find some people who earn an absolute fortune. And I was saying to you before we went on air, I've looked into this and done a little bit of research, and there's some really interesting statistics about, for example, Premier League footballers. I've got a statistic here that a charity for former players called X-Pro said that 3 in 5 Premier League players declare bankrupt after retirement. 3 in 5. Now, even if that's an exaggeration, it's a significant number. And generally, even the poorest Premier League footballer will earn more than most of us.
It's a crazy.
It's mad. It's a crazy figure. And there's something similar, NFL footballers in the States are similar in proportion. I think 78, looking at figures, 78% of NFL players went bankrupt or suffered financial stress within a couple of years of finishing playing. So I think there's a distinction, an important distinction to draw between how much you earn and how much you have. Mm-hmm. And earnings are important, but they're not the only thing by any means. And hopefully we'll get the chance to actually cover that as we go through, because there are plenty of examples of people who earn very, very little and yet have got more money than people who earn a fortune.
It's very much the rich dad, poor dad scenario. That was one of the first books I read, 2011, that really kind of made me think perhaps more towards understanding how to treat money or how to utilize money in a better way.
Yeah.
And it probably was the first stepping stone or building block for me to think, actually, everything I've learned up until this point is probably wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm from a background that's wasn't particularly wealthy. It was a single parent family. I'm one of 6 kids. Wow. So it was about budgeting. It was about spending the cash where it was best spent to ensure we all survived and had clothes and a roof over our head and things like that. So you come from a very frugal upbringing. Yeah.
Well, mine was not dissimilar in that, my father was a cab driver in London. So it's, a solid profession, but not a millionaire's profession. Mm-hmm. And he used to work 60 hours a week. And I remember vaguely, but my parents told me that when I was very young, I said to them, Mum and Dad, are we very, very poor? Because we couldn't afford certain things compared to some of our neighbours. So I thought we were really poor. So listen, there's so many examples of people who come from, should we say, non-privileged backgrounds who learn about money and actually are successful. Equally, though, people come from those kind of backgrounds who never learn.
Yeah.
And the cycle repeats generation after generation. So one of the things I'd like to cover at some point in this call, Steve, is the 5 reasons why people don't have as much money as they want.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dive straight in.
Assuming that'd be quite interesting and useful for people.
Yeah, let's dive straight in. Okay, so let's start. What's number one? What's the number one reason?
Number one. I think the number one reason is it's just not important enough to some people. If you ask people, do you want to be financially independent or financially wealthy? A lot of people say yes, but actually the actions they take don't indicate that. Mm-hmm. They don't follow on from that. So I think for some people, there's a lack of motivation about creating wealth for themselves. And there are various things people can do. One thing is to make a list of, I don't know, 20, 30, 50, 100 reasons why it would benefit them and other people if they were, inverted commas, wealthy from a financial point of view. Mm-hmm. One thing I do want to say, just to backtrack, is there are other measures of wealth. My grandfather was also a cab driver, didn't have much money. He said he was the richest man in the world because he had a wife and 4 kids and 8 grandchildren who totally adored him, and he totally adored as well. So there's different forms of wealth. I don't want to make it just about money, but I guess people listening and watching this will be doing so because they are interested in money. So most of what we're going to cover is measuring wealth in a, inverted commas, financial sense. And I recognize it's not the only form of wealth.
Yeah, it's a collection, isn't it? It's a collection of important things that you hold dear and hold of value.
Yeah.
And quite often I talk to people because a lot of what I talk about is structure. It's about managing time. And if people tell me that they don't have time to do something, it's not that they don't have time to do it. It's the fact that I haven't conveyed how valuable it is, or they haven't understood the value of getting that subject done or whatever I've asked them to do. It's the same context.
Yeah. So going back to the 5 reasons, it's the reason number one I've put here is motivation or lack of it. If people don't have enough reasons to be wealthy, then they probably won't. Mm-hmm. So for those watching or listening, as I say, my tip is to make a list of 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 reasons why it would benefit you and the people around you for you to have financial wealth.
Okay, I've gone through similar exercises, and it's almost like affirmations, isn't it? It reaffirms. It's like positive reinforcement that if I can come up with 100 reasons why I want to be wealthy or financially wealthy and the benefits of, actually it starts to get it into your thought process that the more you think about the positive impact, the more likelihood it will increase on your order of values.
One of the big guys in the field, or one of the fields, Tony Robbins, who's a pretty well-known guy in the field of personal development, he says that if people have got enough reasons, they'll do anything. Yeah. So if people have got enough reasons to be wealthy, they'll find a way. Yeah. The flip side of this is that if there are disadvantages, if someone can perceive disadvantages in being wealthy, in other words, it's a demotivator, make a list of those and then come up with at least 3 reasons for every one of those disadvantages, at least 3 ways or reasons to overcome the disadvantages. So if, for example, someone says the disadvantage is, if I'm wealthy, all my family would be jealous of me and not love me. Well, actually challenge that. Actually, if they really love you, they'll love you anyway. Mm-hmm. And come up with other reasons, at least 3 reasons for each of those one negative reason. Mm-hmm. So those are some tips for people.
Okay, and number 2?
Number 2.
Your second reason.
So number 2, you've kind of touched on it earlier. It's limiting beliefs. Now, just to say, a belief is something which it's our best current thinking about something. And sometimes we're consciously aware of them and some of our beliefs, and sometimes we're not. And a limiting belief is a thought we have or a belief we hold, which in some ways stops us or limits us from being, doing, or having what we want to be, do, or have. Mm-hmm. So a limiting belief is a thought or a belief that we have that limits us from being, doing, and having what we want to be, do, and have. And the interesting thing about beliefs is that when we have a belief, we call it the truth. When someone else has a belief, we call it an opinion. Okay, you notice that one?
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier, you said money's the root of all evil. That's an interesting belief. And we could counteract that by looking at people who've made an absolute fortune and they've used it well. So there are, I'm not going to put names out on this, but there are numerous philanthropists, I think they're called, people who make money and they give it away, or they give a significant amount to charity. So I would, when I do teach this on a course, I've got a list of about 50 different limiting beliefs which people could have around money, and it's not an exhaustive list.
Yeah.
So being the root of all evil is one of them. And so I would urge people to really challenge that belief and ask themselves, is it really true? Where are examples of where that belief is not true, either for themselves or for other people? And also the beliefs could be about money itself. It could be about the world generally. It could be about themselves. In other words, I don't deserve, for example, I don't deserve money, or people from my background don't make money. So there can be all different types of limiting belief. So I would urge people, if they've got negative thoughts about money, to really question that, to really question their beliefs about money. If they're negative, to go about changing them.
It's a really interesting topic, isn't it? I think I talk about it a lot from a recruitment perspective and a sales perspective, in the fact that quite often we'll regress into self-preservation mode, and we come up with things that protect us from harm and protect us from things that may go wrong. And that will include things like financial risk. It will include things that I might lose money on that, or I might not get to where, or I don't deserve to be the top performing consultant because of X. I'm never going to be as good as that person, no matter how hard I try. And it stops you from achieving what you can go out to achieve. Yeah. I think self-awareness for me is a huge part of that.
Absolutely. And I think being aware of your own limiting beliefs is absolutely crucial in being self-aware, because once you're aware of them, you can start challenging them, or come and see people like myself, or there's many other coaches out there who can help people, if they've got limiting beliefs, to overcome them.
Okay, so number 3.
Okay. Actually, but before we do that, I think it's worth actually talking briefly, just backtracking. What is money? Because, and I went on to Google to sort of do some searches, and it reminds me of literally my O-level, first day of my O-level economics. I've got some quotes here. So money can be defined as something that's generally accepted as a medium of exchange. It's a measure of value or a means of payment. It's legal tender. And that's really all it is. Instead of me saying, I'll give, I want some eggs, so I'll give you 3 pence, which is like bartering, like used to be thousands of years ago. It's, okay, I want a dozen eggs, here's a pound. And we can all know what a pound, in the UK, what a pound or a dollar or a euro is. And that's really all it is. It's all the other stuff that goes around money, the limiting beliefs, the root of all evil, etc. That's what gets in the way. That's one of the things that poisons people's thinking about money. In and of itself, it's just those things I mentioned: medium of exchange, store of value, etc., etc. So I think it's worth remembering that as we go through this.
Again, going back to the fact we're human, we like to overcomplicate things. We like to make things more trickier than they perhaps actually are. It's a means of transaction and a store of value.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's not good or bad, right or wrong, evil or nasty. It's money. Yeah. People who have money are not good or bad. People who don't have money are not good or bad. But all these stories that people make up about it. And I'm getting a bit philosophical. I think it's important that people are mindful of this as they go through it. So, number 1, lack of motivation. Number 2, limiting beliefs. The third reason, and it's kind of linked to limiting beliefs, is what I call negative emotions. Things like anger or fear or guilt or shame. Shame about having money, shame about not having money, guilt about having it, guilt about not having it, being scared of money. If I have money, I might lose it. If I don't have money, I might lose, what am I going to do? So those negative emotions can get in the way of people having freedom around money, allowing it to flow into their lives and out of their lives into appropriate ways. So those first three are, if you like, kind of emotional or psychological aspects.
And therefore, we will all be listening, and even in this conversation, I'm sat here thinking of various scenarios where, when you've had an influx of cash, it's that sudden emotion of, what can I buy? Where can I go and put this? And not, well, that's if you're talking to my wife. If you're talking to me, I'm thinking, where can I invest it, or where can I save it?
Now you and I speak in the same language anyway. We'll come on to that.
But it's crazy how we are very emotional individuals at times, and quite often that can make the decisions for us.
Well, it's the emotions around money. The fear of having it, the fear of not having it, it's all that kind of stuff. So does that cover, are you okay with what I've said so far?
Yeah, that's good.
So the fourth reason, so next two, or the final two, are more about knowledge. The first two are about sort of emotions and psychology. This is more about knowledge. So the reason number 4 is not knowing how to make money, or not knowing how to make sufficient money. So all things being equal, if you have more money, you're more likely to be able to retain it and use it wisely. Having said that, there's a couple of stories that one of the best books I've read, probably the best book I've read on this, is a book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And he tells one particular story of a guy called Ronald Reed, who was a janitor. Okay, now no disrespect to janitors, they're generally not the most high-paid people on the planet, generally. And this guy, when he died in his 80s, he had a fortune of $8 million. He left $2 million to his kids and $6 million to a local hospital and charities. A real philanthropist. So, it's not necessarily how much you earn, it's what you do with it. So having said that, if you can earn more money, all things being equal, it's going to help you to have more money in the longer term. And there are all sorts of ways. And my guess is people listen to your podcast because they want to learn ways to make more money.
Yep.
And I've worked with a lot of recruiters as well. This is part of the game, absolutely. And there's all sorts of ways, whether it's things like studying, learning, gaining qualifications, taking on more responsibility, asking for pay rises. There's all sorts of ways to have more money or to earn more money. And if people don't know, then I think going on educational courses or listening to podcasts, for example, that's a useful way of doing it. So that's reason number 4. People don't know ways to earn or make more money. Any thoughts on that, Steve?
Do you know what? Having been in recruitment for 15 years, I spend a large proportion of my days, weeks, months talking to individuals that are looking to move, make career changes because they feel undervalued and they want to earn more money. It is part of the day job.
Yeah.
And having been through a similar process for me, you sit there and I've worked 2 jobs. I've had the day job. I've worked in a bar in the evening. I've done things because I want to be able to create higher income to afford the nicer things in life that provide the opportunities. And I think certainly as I've got older and perhaps a little bit wiser, you start to think, how am I going to make more money by working less? How do I get to a point of not exchanging my time for money?
Yeah.
And you start perhaps thinking a bit more creatively and thoughtfully about multiple streams of income. How can I add other areas of income that work whilst I'm asleep?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very
So
famous quotes out there about earning money while you sleep. And I put myself on a 10-year financial freedom plan when I was 35. So I was 42 in February. And it's been that very journey. How can I earn a little bit more money in different areas?
So it's a combination of how can you earn more money, and the fifth point, which I want to come to, which is how can you use the money you earn?
That's the most vital.
That I think is really important, because I'm going to go back to the professional footballers and the janitor. Professional footballers probably earned more in 1 year than in terms of salaried income than that janitor may have earned in his lifetime. But it's what they did with the money that counted. And there's a saying, I think, in a court of law. What's that saying? Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Okay.
Well, think of it as the same with financial laws. Ignorance of the financial laws is no excuse. And there are certain laws of money, the way money works. And I think it's important that people educate themselves in knowing how to use the money they've got. So I want to give, if it's okay, just a few thoughts about that.
Of course. Yeah.
And these are not necessarily just my thoughts. Some of these, I get from other people. I think a really important thing to do is to put a proportion of your salary, of your earnings, into long-term investments. So as a general principle, if you spend your money on things which either depreciate or don't appreciate in value, then you're not going to be wealthy long-term. Whereas if you put your money in things which are going to, or are likely to appreciate in value, for example, property, for example, stocks and shares, then in the long term, with the compounding effect, so the interest on the interest, or the reinvested dividends, the compounding effect will mean in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you'll have a lot of money. This is what the guy, Ronald Reed, did, the janitor. He invested his money, the little savings he had, he invested in blue chip stocks, American stocks and shares, which grew over time. And so I think it's important that people invest a proportion of their salary in long-term investments, and typically people would say something like 10% of their salary. There was a saying I heard years ago, and I didn't really understand it for years, even though I'm in finance, where they say, pay yourself first. And I didn't fully understand that, but basically, having observed people, I'm really fascinated by people. What a lot of people do is they get money and they'll pay everyone. They'll pay the car payments. They'll pay some of the bills are essential. Absolutely, you've got to pay your mortgage and your rent, or your auto rates, whatever it may be. There's certain things we have to pay, absolutely. But there's a distinction between what we have to pay and what we choose to pay. And so people paying the HP for the bigger car, or rich dad, poor dad, having the bigger mortgage for the bigger house, so you could put more stuff that depreciates in value in that house, more clothes that you don't really need. So invest a significant proportion, at least 10%, pay yourself first, put that into a long-term savings account, which you can't touch or you don't ever touch, and you allow it to accumulate. And if it's a regular amount of money that's taken out, you get used to not having it. When I was, again, mistakes I've made, when I was younger, I started at my first job, I sort of said, I earned like £400 a month take home. This is a long time ago, about 1970 something. And my approach then was, well, I'll spend what I want, and if there's any left over at the end of the month, I'll save it. And guess what? There was never anything left over at the end of the month. Whereas if I would have put, let's say, 50 quid a month in the bank and lived on 350, I would have been able to do that. Okay, so it's really important to put an amount of money into long-term savings, which you don't touch, and it grows and grows and grows. That's paying you, because it's your money.
Yeah,
it's going to grow for you.
I actually wrote in my notes. So, I read a book called The Pumpkin Plan. Mike Michalowicz. I think that's how you say his surname. It's a great book, and it's about the context of pay yourself first.
Yeah.
And like you, I bought it. It was recommended to me, and they were talking about pay yourself first. And I'm thinking, they've got that backwards, because obviously you've got to pay your bills, you've got to pay this, that, and the other. You've got to do this, and then you can live off the remainder. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's the pumpkin play in terms of this story, but it was a story of when he was looking to obviously run a successful business. He hired his accountant, and he used to say, "This is what you're paying me." And I think it was his wife at the time as well. "So you pay me and the wife this amount, and everything you've got left is what you're going to pay the bills with. So you can choose how you pay the bills, but that is the amount." And the amount started off very small. And I mean, you're talking like $50 or whatever it was to pay 4 lots of 4-figure bills.
Yeah.
And the accountant had to suffer that. But as the business grew, obviously they were able to pay more bills. But it's the story of the shock of the accountant's face when Mike was saying, "Well, you've only got $50. Go and do what you can with that."
Yeah.
It's like, but that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
It's flipping perhaps traditional thinking on its head, because that's how we're taught. That's how everybody's always lived. And I think the ability to have that.
Can I just say, I don't think everyone's always lived that way.
Okay.
A lot of people do, but I think there are people who are savvy about money, who understand the financial laws.
Yeah.
And they know that if you put money away in assets that are going to appreciate, then in the long term, you benefit big time.
Yeah. I think my biggest struggle with it all, so I've read a lot of wealth management books, lots of investment books, lots of books on money. Yeah. And I love it. I love the education. I love the journey. I love listening to the way people talk about how they've become successful and what they did to get there. But it's not really taught anyway. You've got to go out and find it. You've got to go out and get it. Yeah. And I don't know whether it's just, I don't know. It's like that protected fortress of, you will only know and understand the rules of money unless you go and seek it, because we're not going to offer it to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of this information is hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
So this is why I go back to the point number one. If people are motivated enough, if it's important enough to them to be wealthy, they will find a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I sit here now as a dad. So I've got 2 boys, 4 years and 9. So they're way too young to understand necessarily money and value. I can do little teachings.
That's an interesting belief though, Steve.
They're beginning to learn. I bought my oldest, what's the story of the book? It's a book about acorns. It's a best-selling book for children to teach them how to put a portion of their acorns away for later. Yeah. It's the story of these squirrels. But I feel like I've been on a journey for a reason, on the fact that I can start to teach them early on, because I didn't start really understanding till I was perhaps in my early 30s.
Yeah.
And that's
great. Well, that's it. Yeah. And it's a good reason for you to get good at money. One of the reasons to be wealthy is to pass that information as well as the wealth on to your children. Yeah, that's another reason people can add to their list.
Yeah, and hopefully I don't make too many mistakes to get to the point where I can actually say, this is how you can do it.
All mistakes are learning opportunities.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. So going back to knowing what to do about money, I mean, I get the feeling we could talk about this for more than just one session somehow.
Happy.
So you might want to think of yourself as your own finance director of your own life. Mm. And it's important to, as a finance director, so whether you like accountants or not, whether you're interested or not, every single business produces 2 documents every year. And in the stock market, they have to produce these 2, plus 1 or 2 others. The balance sheet and the profit and loss accounts. The balance sheet is a list of assets and liabilities. Okay, assets are things which you own, which you could sell and own and get money from. And liabilities are things that you owe, like debt, debts or mortgages. What I would say, now, I can say this as an ex-accountant, or I'm still technically qualified. The accounting definition of assets is not necessarily the most useful if you want to be wealthy. Because in accounting's term, a car is an asset because you can sell it. But I would say, if you want to be wealthy, you wouldn't put your money in cars unless they're vintage cars. They're going to appreciate in value. Most cars that most of us drive are going to depreciate. You know that saying, the moment you drive off the forecourt, you lose whatever, 20%. Mm-hmm. So I would say that an asset is something which gives you money year on year. Okay, so things like stocks and shares, rental properties, things like that. So to know, and I think I would recommend every single person listening to this does their own balance sheet. So to list out all their assets and all their liabilities, and you get a net figure of net worth. And, you know, companies call it shareholder value or shareholder funds. For us, we could call it our net worth. And I've still got this. I've had this for over 20 years. I have an Excel spreadsheet with different sheets, and I do my own balance sheet every 3 to 6 months. And over the years, I've invested in property, and I see, and I love this. Well, okay, I'll just be honest. I love seeing my net worth grow year on year on year. Yeah. And even if it's zero, even if it's negative, get clear what it is now and have a plan to help it, to help turn it around so it grows. Okay.
You've got, I love that. I have a spreadsheet. I started my spreadsheets with my balance sheet. Balance sheet actually came from reading Robert Kiyosaki's books.
Yeah.
He talks about having your kind of personal balance sheet. And you analyze where you are. You understand your good and bad debt, your liabilities, your assets, and and you know the net worth at the end. And I've done that since 2012, I reckon, 2013. And I'm a bit probably more OCD. I update figures every month, which is probably a bit too much, but it just gives me clarity and gives me peace of mind to know where we are. And I do it for the whole family. I do it for the investments and invest for my 2 boys as well from birth, because I wanted them to have the ability of choice later on down the line. And I think for anyone listening, just the ability to know where you are today is a good start, even if you're in negative equity or you're in debt and you've got to clear that. When we first spoke a number of weeks ago, we were talking about understanding perhaps your position of debt and how to budget and get out of that cycle. I mean, what advice would you give if there's people that are listening and they've racked up credit card debts, they've got loan debts, and they're thinking, I can't even begin to invest any money because I get consumed every month?
Okay, so ideally, the pattern should be save, invest, and speculate, in that order. So you want to have a certain amount of savings, and conventional advice is you'd have between 6 and 12 months of your expenditure. So if you're spending £1,000 a month, you'd want to have between £6,000 and £12,000 sitting in the bank just for the rainy day. And obviously what's been, the pandemic.
In case of pandemic.
But if by some chance. Now, if people have got themselves in a situation where they've had some bad debt, in other words, they've racked up credit card debts, for example, my tip is to pay off the highest interest rate first. If you can consolidate it, actually, I've got to step back. So although I'm a technically qualified accountant, everything I say is just my opinion. It's not financial advice. I'm repeating what other experts have told me. I just want to put that caveat in, just to be clear on that. The experts I've spoken to, heard, would say that and common sense would say, that you pay off the highest debt first, highest interest rate first. If you can consolidate it, some credit cards are allowed to consolidate, so you consolidate it into as lower interest rate as possible, and come up with a plan. So this is going to link to the second statement. I mentioned the balance sheet, then there's companies call it the profit and loss account. For you and I, you could call it a monthly or annual budget or an income and expenditure account, where we list our income and then we list our expenses and our expenditure. And I would urge people to look at their expenses and say, what is absolutely essential? What is kind of nice to have, and what's a bit of a luxury? And I think generally we want to have, to have like 5 or 10% spent on fun or luxuries. I think that's not unreasonable. But beyond that, I think to start paying off the debt and to have a plan to pay it off. And if it means you don't go on holiday for a couple of years, tough. If it means you have to have a small car rather than a big car, tough. So it's about, because otherwise you get yourself into a spiral and it just gets worse and worse. So clear your debts. Even if it's going to take you a year or 3 years or 5 years, clear your debts. And then start saving. And once you've saved a certain amount, then you can start investing. Yeah, absolutely. To come back to this, so in terms of, so look at your income and expenditure, and the ideal is to reduce your expenditure so that your profit, if you like, your surplus at the end is sufficient. It gets bigger and bigger, so you can then invest that back into assets, which gives you more income. Do you see what I mean? So it becomes a virtuous circle. I'm sure Robert Kiyosaki says something similar in his book. I did read the book about 10 years ago. Yeah. But the idea is, he would say, live in the smallest house you can tolerate, and take the surplus and put it into, he said, property, whether it's property or shares or whatever, do that. So it's investment. So it gives you something. So you're making your money work for you rather than you working for the money.
So true. I've made a note, wherever I wrote it. It's about, I think for me, I do a lot on social media, and I am a big fan and firm believer of building a personal brand, putting yourself out there, and it's worked really well for me over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
The problem that social media has brought, certainly in regards to money and finance and wealth, is the hype that it, I suppose, applauds. And it will quite often show pictures of private jets, fast cars, nice clothes, holidays. And the idea, certainly within perhaps the current generation, is that millionaires, billionaires, really wealthy people spend all their money buying all these depreciating products and assets, spending an absolute fortune.
Yeah.
Where actually, that generally is the case. You speak to most millionaires and they're going to say, live within my means, spend my money well, invest it in the right places, and watch it grow. Yeah.
So, as you were saying that, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry or yawn, because I've heard and seen, not about you, Steve, but I've seen so many of these kind of ads, and I'm going to be really blunt. People need to wake up.
Yeah.
People who think they can, there'll always be stories of people who are lucky. They'll invest in Bitcoin or they'll win the lottery or stuff. And okay, fine. But the masses, for most of us, we need to be smart with our money as opposed to lucky. So I go back to what I said. Pay off your debts if you've got them. So your bad debts, your credit card and high interest debt. Save money. When you've got enough money to save, start investing it. And once you've got enough money invested, then you can even speculate, inverted commas, with a proportion of it. Mm-hmm. So if someone's worth £1 million and they want to put 20 grand in Bitcoin, they can afford to lose that. Mm-hmm. Most people, if they've got £1 million. Whereas if someone's if someone's whole financial worth is 20,000, to put all of that into Bitcoin, they might be lucky, but they might not.
We had an interesting conversation, didn't we, last week? I got into FX commodity trading, day trading, back in 2012. Spent and invested some money in a 12-month mentorship program, and you sit there and you think, I can be a millionaire within 12 months. I'm going to earn so much because I'm going to dedicate all of my time. I'm going to do all the back testing. I'm going to get myself to a point where I'm earning money off every trade. And people get swept by on the emotion of, this is the quick or get rich quick scheme. If I invest my time, I'm gonna do it. And I think quite often that's what happens these days because of the surge of social media, because of the ability of selling and showing all the dollar notes all over the place. And I did this through trading. Bitcoin being probably something very similar. I don't know too much about Bitcoin, so
I mean, I think, look, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know there's something called dopamine, which is like the feel-good hormone. And there's a lot, I think one of the things I noticed, I'm at a certain age where I can remember life before social media. And, when people could just sit down and have a conversation without having all these, tweets and Facebook messages and all these images being thrown into our head. We need to have a good look at ourselves and think, is this realistic? You've got people in the city who are got PhDs and first-class mathematics degrees from Oxford who are trading, and they are the experts. They're doing it all the time, and not all of them make a lot of money. So someone thinking that they can just go on a 2-week course that someone's selling them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and to be able to beat the market. Look, it is possible, but what are the odds of that?
It's rare.
It's pretty rare, I would suggest. If it were that simple, everyone would be able to do it.
Yeah. So
I think, again, this goes back to people educating themselves about what money really is and how money works.
Yeah, it's education. And for me, I think I've changed my thought process over the years. So I have been that person. I've been the person that swept along thinking I can provide for my family through doing FX trading and day trading, whatever else. But I think as I educated myself, I read more books, I understood wealth management better.
Yeah.
I adopted a more long-term view, whether that be stocks and shares, whether that be in investing in property or having a mix of everything. I still do all of that. It's not like I've just suddenly stopped because, that doesn't work. Something wrong with it, or I can't do it. It's just understanding that the approach can be different or more longer term.
Yeah. Patience is a virtue.
Yeah.
Yeah. The guy, Ronald Reed, he was patient. His relatively small amounts of money each month compounded and compounded and compounded. He played the long game.
Yeah.
And sure, you'll hear people who say, they make a fortune. And there is evidence that people who come into money very quickly sometimes don't have the knowledge or the psychology to be able to retain it.
Mm-hmm. It happens, doesn't it? Lottery winners.
Lottery winners. And you could argue, some of these professional footballers who, a lot of them are just, ordinary people who they make a fortune and they don't have what it takes to be able to really understand about money. So they'll end up losing it.
Mm.
So, in terms of, I go back to what I said, the fifth reason why people don't have as much money as they want is because they don't understand how money works. One of the financial laws is that to get a greater level of return, you'll need to take a greater level of risk or volatility. So people say, make 100% returns. It's possible, but you've got to take a massive risk to do it. Mm-hmm. Because if it were that simple, everyone would do it. So I would urge watchers and viewers and listeners to work hard, use their money wisely, have goals, have financial goals, have reasons, be determined. And recruitment is one of those businesses where there is a potential to earn quite good money, very good money, in fact. And so people get bonuses. Use your bonuses wisely. Don't just go and blow it on a holiday. My dad used to say to me, always have something to show for your money. And I suppose I could add to that. And when he said to have something to show for your money, he didn't mean having a beer gut or having a load of photographs from your holiday in Acapulco.
Yeah.
He meant something tangible and useful that appreciated in value, as opposed to cars that depreciate in value.
Yeah, it's a really good lesson. I think about my own personal journey. Me and my wife were top performers when we worked together back in the day, 2006. And I would say probably for 5 to 10 years of that, we had a really good life. We went on really lovely holidays. We spent badly, but enjoyed it. And I don't regret those days at all. I enjoyed it. But in hindsight, 10 years on from that, I sit there and think, why didn't I start the investment journey earlier?
Yeah. one thing that's really useful for people to do is to get an Excel spreadsheet and build a spreadsheet which says put £100. Imagine you put £100 a month or £1,200 a year, let's say, and to compound it. It's a simple formula you can use to compound it, let's say even at 3%, and look at the difference between if you do it for 10 years or if you do it for 20 years or if you do it for 30 years, and to see the difference that it makes.
That's huge. Yeah. I've done that.
Yeah. So I would really urge everyone to do that. So the other thing, I mean, going back to some things I was saying about money. So yeah, put your 10% in long-term investment. Put 10% of it in a savings that stuff you're going to need. Like, you're going to need a new fridge at some time, or you're going to want a holiday, or maybe you're going to need to replace your car. Have a pot for that. Spend 5-10% or 10% a year of your income on fun. Go and enjoy your money. It's not about sort of being frugal and living in a sort of convent or a monastery or the equivalent, whatever religion you are. Enjoy yourself, but be sensible.
Yeah.
Have a long-term plan. Use your money wisely.
It's having fun.
Yeah.
Jeremy, it has been an absolute pleasure. There has been so many
I really enjoyed it.
Useful nuggets of information that I know our listeners and viewers can go and implement if they need to. If there are people listening and they want to come and speak to you more about what you offer in terms of coaching and training and mentoring, where is the best place for them to come and find you?
Best thing is to either go to my website or to email me. Jeremy Lazarus is one of those fairly unusual names. If you Google Jeremy Lazarus Coach London, there aren't too many of us. So my website address is the Lazarus Consultancy. It's www.thelazarus.com, LAZARUS.com, and it's jeremy@thelazarus.com.
That's fantastic. Jeremy, a massive thank you for joining me. I know you're booked in for part 2 at some point in the near future. So I look forward to chatting with you again. And thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Thank you, Steve.